Diddy Trial 17. Michael warned Paris. Jason about Diddy, now. The whole world knows. No one expected her to show up. Day 17 of the Diddy trial had already been tense from the start. Photographers were banned. Reporters were seated with nothing but their pens and quiet stares. Then, just past noon, a slim figure walked into the back of the courtroom hood, up sunglasses on alone. It was Paris Jackson. A murmur began to rise, but was quickly silenced when people noticed what she was holding: a sealed white envelope, thick yellowed by time, no logo, no court stamp, just a single name handwritten in black ink on the front for Paris. The clerk whispered something to the judge, a nod, a pause, then a motion to let her speak. When Paris stood, she looked calm, but there was a weight in the way she moved, like someone carrying more than paper. She walked toward the witness stand, eyes focused, hands trembling slightly. She didn't make a scene. She didn't have to. Once seated, she placed the envelope on the desk in front of her. "It was from my father," she said quietly, almost like she was talking to herself. "He wrote it for me. But now it matters to all of you." Gasps echoed through the room. Even Diddy looked up. His attorneys leaned in, whispering furiously. But he remained still, silent, watching. The judge asked her to proceed. Paris opened the envelope slowly. Inside was a single folded sheet worn at the edges. As she unfolded it, she stopped. "I don't want to be here," she said plainly. "I never wanted to speak, but after everything I've seen, I can't stay quiet anymore." The judge took the letter and began to read. The words cut through the air like a blade. "Some men smile as they take your soul behind your back. I've met them. I know them. If my daughter ever meets Shikomi, stay away." Silence. No one moved. No one coughed. A pen rolled off a bench somewhere in the back, but no one reached to pick it up. Diddy blinked slowly. His lips pressed together. His fingers tapped once against the table, then stopped. Paris sat motionless. The courtroom was no longer just a courtroom. It had become something else, a stage for ghosts, a reckoning. This wasn't just testimony. This was history speaking. And Michael Jackson's voice, long gone, had just entered the room. Paris couldn't sleep. Her body was tired, but her mind refused to rest. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling of a quiet apartment, far from Neverland, far from cameras, far from the noise of who she used to be. Something pressed in her chest, a feeling, a shadow of a memory. Then she remembered the vault, a fireproof box deep in storage where her father kept things for later. She hadn't opened it in years. When she did, the smell of old paper and cedar filled the air. There it was, the envelope, still sealed, still waiting, just as he'd left it. She almost put it back. But then she saw the name inside the folded sheet, Shah Gomez, and suddenly everything made sense. The warnings, the mood swings, the strange silence every time that name was mentioned. Her father had known. He didn't name many people in writing, but he named this one. Paris explained it all. "When I was 12, we were riding in the back of the SUV. My dad said to me, 'Some people build empires with music. Others build it by draining people like me.' I didn't understand then, but I do now." The courtroom watched as she spoke, her voice, even her hands, still, her eyes fixed on Diddy. "My father didn't trust him, not as an artist, not as a person." She described overhearing late-night arguments through closed doors at Neverland, folders of photos and contracts. Her father's face tight with worry, his voice only raised when certain names came up. "Diddy was always one of them. He told me, 'Some people want your light. They smile, but they don't care about you. Once you're empty, they move on.'" She paused, looked down. He wasn't paranoid. He was right. "Miss Jackson," he asked, "do you believe this letter is relevant to the case?" Paris didn't flinch. "It's not just relevant. It's the blueprint." That was when everything shifted. Prosecutors leaned forward. Defense attorneys whispered urgently. The jurors looked shaken, suddenly unsure. The weight in the room had changed. It was no longer about headlines or lawyers. This was legacy. A father trying to protect his daughter from beyond the grave. No one knew it existed. A voicemail, hidden for years, found on an old phone that belonged to Michael's former attorney, buried, forgotten, until now. The court approved it as evidence. The clerk pressed play. Michael Jackson's voice filled the courtroom, raspy, careful, fragile but firm. Things are being pushed on me I don't agree with. They say it's just business, but it feels wrong. Please, stay far away from Sherlock Holmes. Paris must not be near that world. I beg you. A pause. Silence. No sobs. No outbursts. Just silence. The kind that only comes when truth arrives too late and still hits like lightning. Diddy didn't move, but the crack in his composure was visible now. His attorney stood up and objected. This is hearsay, he insisted. A personal opinion. Nothing more than a grieving man's paranoia. But the judge didn't agree. This court does not dismiss a dying father's warning to his daughter as mere opinion, he said calmly. And that was when Diddy finally spoke. Rising to his feet, angry now, voice shaking, he snapped, "This is a smear job. Michael Jackson was paranoid. He believed in aliens, and now we're taking his ghost as gospel." Murmurs filled the room, but the judge silenced him. "Mr. Combs, you will speak through counsel from now on." Diddy sat back down, jaw clenched, and the prosecution stepped in. "You heard Zanaya. You've now heard Paris. And now you've heard Michael. This is not just testimony, it's truth that was warned about years ago." The defense tried to shake her. "You say your father feared Mr. Combs. But is there any record of this? Any public complaint? Was this letter ever notarized?" Paris responded without emotion. "The letter wasn't for the public, it was for me. Not every truth needs a notary stamp." The defense kept going. They showed a photo from years ago, Paris and Diddy smiling at an award show. If he was such a threat, why the smile? Paris leaned in. "In this business, you learn to smile when the cameras flash, even when your gut is screaming. That's what survival looks like." Silence. Even the jury shifted in their seats. The prosecution had one more surprise. An old interview. Grainy, nearly forgotten. Michael Jackson's seated voice quiet. "Some people in this business don't want success. They want dominance. They eliminate others to get it. I've warned people close to me. I won't name names, but I've warned them." The implication was clear, and Diddy's face, once smug, once calm, was now a mask. Tense, pale, because this wasn't just about words anymore. It was about a pattern. It was about a father who had seen the storm before anyone else, and a daughter brave enough to bring that warning to light. The courthouse steps were flooded with cameras. Some held signs, "We believe Paris." Others shouted, "MJ warned us." Others still defended Diddy, but no one could deny what had happened. Michael Jackson had entered the trial not with a motion or a statement, but with a whisper across time. And Paris Jackson had carried that whisper into a courtroom filled with silence. Paris didn't go home that night. The courtroom had emptied out slowly with the weight of what had happened still hanging in the air. Reporters typed frantically in the hallway. Defense lawyers avoided cameras. Prosecutors kept their folders tight to their chests. No one wanted to speak first, not after hearing that voice. Paris slipped out the back door. No cameras caught her. No reporters shouted her name. She had arranged for a private car, not a luxury SUV, but a plain rental. She told the driver to take her somewhere quiet, not to a hotel. She didn't want turned-down service or room keys with logos. She rented a small one-bedroom apartment on the edge of downtown under a different name. No entourage, no press, just silence. Inside, she laid the envelope flat on the kitchen table and stared at it. Her father's handwriting stared back. So familiar. The loops. The careful spacing. She had memorized it as a child from sticky notes on mirrors. Lyrics scribbled on napkins and pages torn from notebooks. She didn't cry. Instead, she turned on the old cassette player she carried in her suitcase, pressed play. It was his voice again, but not the courtroom clip. This one was personal. It was from years ago, saved on tape before the world got louder. "You were born with light, Paris. That's why they'll come. Not for you. For what they can take." He had said it like he was talking about a coming storm. Quiet, steady, measured. She let the tape play until the end. Then she sat still for a long time. The next morning the trial resumed. Paris wasn't on the docket, but her presence remained. The jurors arrived differently, heads down, more cautious. The judge looked like he hadn't slept. Diddy's defense team seemed more coordinated, but under strain. Their plan had cracked, and now they were racing to rebuild it before it collapsed. Diddy sat with his hands clasped, a man diminished. The bravado was gone. His jaw remained tight. He didn't look up much. When he did, it was always toward the ceiling, never toward the jury. Never toward Paris, though she was no longer even in the room. Witnesses gave testimony. Evidence was submitted. But everyone felt the shadow. It was more than the letter. It was more than the tape. It was the idea that someone had seen all this coming and no one listened. The prosecution moved quietly, confidently. They didn't need to force anything anymore. The voice of Michael Jackson had done what years of whispers and lawsuits could not. It had cracked the illusion. Now people were listening with different ears. Later that afternoon, an unexpected moment came. A former assistant to Michael was called in, not for scheduled testimony, but to verify the storage history of the letter. She confirmed the fireproof box, the vault, the sealed state of the envelope. It hadn't been touched, she said. It was stored with his will and private notes. I was instructed to keep it safe specifically for Paris. Was it marked as legal material, the defense asked? No, she answered. It was marked as personal. But Michael didn't separate truth that way. He just said, "She'll know when." "And you believe she knew?" "I do now," the assistant said. The courtroom fell quiet again. Meanwhile, outside, social media exploded. Clips of the judge reading the letter were reenacted in TikToks. Hashtags spread. Noir, MJ warned us. Wars, Paris speaks. He said stay away. Late-night anchors debated whether Michael's fears were real or part of a broader paranoia. But the public sentiment had shifted. What once felt like conspiracy now felt like prophecy. The biggest shift came when a music producer, anonymous for years, posted on social media. He said the same thing to me in 2005, about the man with too many deals and too many smiles. I didn't listen. I wish I had. The comment had no name, no detail, but it caught fire. Thousands reshared it. Inside the courtroom, however, things got colder. The defense moved to challenge the admissibility of the voicemail again. This time they brought a digital forensics expert. He examined the recording's origin, confirmed the phone model, the storage metadata, and the date. "It appears authentic," he admitted reluctantly. "There is no evidence of manipulation." The defense attorney frowned. "So the voice belongs to Michael Jackson?" "Yes, and it was recorded before his death." They had no further questions. The judge turned toward the prosecution. "Do you wish to continue?" "Yes, Your Honor, with one last witness today." A surprise. The courtroom doors opened and in walked someone few recognized at first until the badge flashed. An investigator from the Department of Justice. He wasn't part of the original case, but he had been following the connections quietly, especially after the letter became public. His testimony was brief but devastating. "There's now a pattern," he said. "Multiple victims, consistent behavioral markers, pressure isolation, emotional leverage. What Miss Jackson read in that letter matches what others have now begun to report." He submitted a sealed document. The judge reviewed it privately. "This will be reviewed off record," the judge stated. But the implication was already clear. This was bigger than Diddy. It was a network, a system, and someone had just confirmed that people were finally talking. The defense tried to downplay it. They claimed Paris was emotional grieving, perhaps even misled by memory. They called her a daughter trying to find closure in the courtroom instead of therapy. But it didn't land. Because no one doubted her calm. No one doubted her stillness. Her clarity had spoken louder than any shout. Outside crowds grew. Placards now carried full quotes from the letter. He lifts people to clip their wings. When someone tries to silence you, that's when you speak. If they ever try to erase your story, tell mine. It will protect you. These were no longer just words. They were the new language of resistance. That night, Paris sat again at the edge of her rented bed. She read the letter out loud once more, this time not to herself, but into her phone. She didn't post it. She didn't need to. The world was already listening. The courtroom felt different now. No one said it out loud, but something had shifted. Even the court reporter typed slower, like each word carried extra weight. Jurors entered with more hesitation in their eyes. A few avoided looking at the defense table entirely. Diddy sat upright, but it no longer looked like confidence. It looked like control, forced, tight, rigid. The kind of posture someone holds not to express power, but to stop from falling apart. Outside protest lines grew. There were fans, detractors, curious onlookers. Some carried innocent until proven signs. Others held cardboard, painted with MJ tried to warn us in red letters. The courthouse was now part courtroom, part cultural battlefield. Inside testimony resumed. Witnesses were called. Most gave facts, contracts, locations, interactions. But each sentence now lived in the shadow of that letter and that voice. One witness, a choreographer who once worked briefly with Diddy, asked to testify anonymously, her voice disguised. She said she had left the industry years ago after a series of disturbing encounters. He would say things, she said, that felt normal at first. Until you realized you weren't a person anymore, you were a part of a plan, a transaction. When the defense asked for specifics, she simply said it wasn't about what he did. It was about how he made you feel powerless without ever raising his voice. The prosecution asked one question. Did any of his words or actions match what Michael Jackson warned his daughter about? She looked directly at the jury. Yes, word for word. The judge allowed the statement. That moment hit hard. Not for its length, but for its quiet certainty. Paris didn't even need to be present anymore. The echo of her father's warning now moved through other voices. By afternoon, reporters had stopped filing basic trial summaries. They were writing essays, columns, cultural think pieces. Phrases like ghost testimony, posthumous justice, and legacy defense appeared in headlines. Back in the courtroom, the defense tried to regain control. They pushed harder, demanded timelines, questioned motive. Why would Paris Jackson wait until now, one lawyer asked, during cross-examination of the DOJ investigator? The answer was simple. Because now there are enough voices for one of them to be heard. The defense shifted tactics again. They showed more old photographs, public events where Michael and Diddy stood side by side, smiling, shaking hands, sharing stages. If Mr. Jackson truly feared my client, the defense attorney argued, why would he keep appearing with him in public? A valid question on the surface, but one the jury didn't buy. Because by now they had heard the deeper truth, fear doesn't always look like retreat. Sometimes it looks like survival, like playing along, like smiling when cameras are rolling and staying silent until it's too late. Paris had said it best. In this business, the first thing they teach you is how to smile. The second thing is how to disappear when they're done with you. The jury didn't forget. Later that day, something small but chilling occurred. A bailiff slipped a note to the judge who read it, then turned to the gallery. Paris Jackson is not to be contacted during these proceedings, he said. Any further attempts to approach her directly or indirectly will be considered witness tampering. No one knew who tried, but the message was clear. Someone was afraid of what else she might bring. The rest of the day passed with tension humming just beneath the surface. Diddy's defense grew more performative. Dramatic pauses, raised voices, photos waved in the air, but none of it landed. Because the jury had seen something you can't unsee. They had heard a voice from beyond time telling a daughter to run, and watched that daughter stand still instead and speak. After court adjourned, the sidewalks outside turned into open debate. Live streamers held up their phones to chanting crowds. One teenager read the letter aloud on TikTok and started crying halfway through. The clip went viral overnight. On a podcast that evening, a former entertainment lawyer said quietly, "This trial isn't about Diddy anymore. It's about all of them, about how long this industry has stayed silent." Paris just broke that. In her rented apartment, Paris read transcripts from the day's session. She marked a line where the witness said, "I didn't realize it until I was out." She whispered, "Neither did I." She poured herself tea, left her phone on the kitchen counter, walked to the window. Down below, reporters waited, quiet, respectful. One woman in a denim jacket held a handmade sign that read, "If they try to silence you, tell his story." Paris smiled just a little. She didn't wave. She didn't need to. She closed the curtain, lit a candle, and sat down again with the letter in her lap. Her father's words still echoed. But now she wasn't the only one who could hear them. The courtroom was quieter than usual. No whispering. No rustling of jackets or papers. Even the attorneys moved differently, slower, more deliberate. The tension wasn't just legal, it was personal now, emotional. Like everyone had started to understand that something sacred was unfolding and no one wanted to be the one to break it. Paris was not in attendance that morning, but her name was on every tongue, even in silence. Her testimony had settled like dust over every surface in that room, and it wouldn't leave. The judge entered with a slower step. The bailiff's tone was less sharp, more steady. Even the stenographer paused longer between sessions, as if trying to give the words more room to breathe. The prosecution wasted no time. They began by playing the voicemail again. Not for drama, but for clarity. Michael Jackson's voice came through the courtroom speakers once more, slow, low, and urgent. "Paris must not be exposed to that environment, I beg you." The second time hearing it was worse than the first, because now everyone already knew what came next. You could feel the discomfort in the room. Several jurors closed their eyes. One shifted forward, elbows on knees, hands clasped in front of their mouth. A few people in the gallery held their breath without realizing. When it ended, no one said anything for almost a full minute. Then the prosecution stepped forward. "Your Honor," one attorney began, "we ask the court to consider the following. If this voice, this plea, were not Michael Jackson's, if this letter had not been handwritten, by him sealed and stored away, then what motive would Miss Jackson possibly have to bring it forward now at the risk of everything she holds sacred?" Silence followed again. No objections, not even from the defense. But they weren't finished. The defense called one final witness, a music publicist, who had worked with both Michael and Diddy in overlapping periods. He wore a sharp suit, hair slicked back, smile tight. He sat with confidence. "I worked with them both," he said. "They respected each other, did business together, were seen in public often." He gestured toward another photo of the two men shaking hands. "They may not have been friends, but they weren't enemies." The defense nodded. "Would you describe Diddy as dangerous?" The witness laughed lightly. "No. Ambitious, sure, but dangerous, no. That's media spin." The prosecution stood. "Were you ever in private meetings with them?" "No," he admitted. "So you're basing your view on public behavior?" "Correct." "Have you ever worked with Miss Jackson?" "No." "Then you can't speak to her motivations, or her father's instructions to her, or the authenticity of what she brought into this courtroom. Can you—" The publicist paused. "No, I can't." That was all. They didn't need to say more, because by now everyone understood the difference between a staged handshake and a whispered warning. Court recessed for lunch. Outside, more people gathered. Not loud, not chaotic, but present, holding signs, wearing T-shirts with hand-drawn quotes from the letter. One woman held a child in her arms and told a news anchor, "Michael raised his kids to see truth even when no one else does. Now it's our turn to listen." Back inside, the closing arguments were approaching, and the judge made a decision. He allowed the letter, the voicemail, and supporting testimony to stand as official evidence, not just for narrative but for pattern. A seismic ruling. The defense tried one last time to discredit Paris. They questioned her age at the time the letter was written, her mental health history, her exposure to the industry. They implied she may have misinterpreted exaggerated imagined parts of her father's warnings through the lens of grief. But the damage was done. Because Paris never claimed to be perfect. She only claimed to remember. She only claimed to know what her father's face looked like when Diddy's name was mentioned. She only claimed to carry that memory until now, when it mattered most. The prosecution's final move came unexpectedly. A private journal entry, Michael's handwriting, dated, quietly submitted earlier in the week. It hadn't been shared yet until now. It read, "When you're no longer here to protect your child, leave her your voice. And if your voice is taken, let the truth find her anyway." The room froze. There was no objection. Not because it was flawless strategy, but because there was nothing left to say. By the time court was adjourned for the day, even the reporters seemed slower to speak, slower to post. The commentary had turned inward. The headlines no longer screamed. They reflected. One read, Michael spoke. Paris listened. We all heard it. Another, the trial is no longer about one man. And another, from testimony to legacy, a courtroom changed forever. As dusk fell, a soft rain began outside. No storm, no thunder. Just the kind of rain that reminds you, some things have already been washed clean, and others are still waiting. That night, Paris stayed inside. She didn't check the news. She didn't scroll through social media or respond to texts. Her phone buzzed constantly, journalists, old friends, strangers. She turned it face down on the kitchen table and walked away. She sat by the window again, watching the wet streetlights shimmer through the rain. Down below, a few umbrellas passed people moving with quiet purpose. Somewhere in the distance, a camera flash popped. She didn't look. The letter lay beside her, folded neatly. It had been read, replayed, debated, analyzed. But it wasn't done. Because Michael hadn't written it for the public. He had written it for her. She held it gently, fingertips running across the paper's worn edges. The creases from when he folded it himself. The slight smudge where ink had dragged under his hand. She remembered those hands, soft, long-fingered, always moving. She could hear his voice again. Some people take your shine and sell it. Others try to erase it before it can outgrow theirs. But your light is yours. When she was younger, she didn't understand. She thought it was just a metaphor, something poetic. Now she knew it was warning. And every detail of the trial proved he had seen it coming. The next morning, Paris didn't return to the courtroom. She didn't need to. Her absence was more powerful than her presence. Because even without her, the testimony continued to unfold under the shadow of her father's voice. The prosecution called their final rebuttal witness, a retired executive who had once worked under the same conglomerate that managed both Michael and Diddy's distribution deals. He had stayed silent for years. But after Paris spoke, he contacted federal agents. He testified under oath, voice calm but cautious. There were meetings Michael never wanted to attend, he said. Events he pushed back against. One name kept coming up, always attached to pressure, to deals with strings. That name was Coma's. The judge asked, did he ever file a complaint? No, the man admitted, but he kept records, he kept receipts, notes. He wrote warnings in the margins of contracts. Why didn't you come forward sooner? The man looked down, because no one was listening, not then. But they're listening now, the prosecutor asked. The witness nodded, thanks to her, yes. That acknowledgement sent a ripple through the courtroom. There was no need to clarify who her was. Afterward, the defense declined further witnesses. They had nothing left. Their narrative had unraveled. What began as a strategy to isolate Paris as a grieving daughter, an emotional distraction, had failed. Because the story she brought wasn't hers alone. It was layered, echoed, confirmed. One witness turned into two, then three, then a voicemail, then a journal, then a sealed envelope. A map of truth stretching over years and silence. When court recessed that afternoon, even the opposing attorneys looked worn out. Not defeated, just exhausted by the realization that they were not fighting one person's memory, but the weight of a man who had never truly left. Outside crowds grew again. A woman passed out printed copies of the letter, offering them quietly, no shouting. A teenage boy read it aloud on a live stream, hands shaking. "He lifts people to clip their wings," he read. Damn, I didn't get that line until now. Up the street, graffiti had started to appear on brick walls and alley corners, not vandalism but tribute. "Listen to Paris. MJ knew. Truth doesn't die." The courthouse had become a shrine as much as a battleground, and inside every movement felt reverent. The judge announced that closing arguments would begin the next morning. He looked directly at the jury. "You will not just be weighing facts," he said. "You will be deciding how much a warning is worth." No one moved, no one spoke. The day ended in stillness. At home, Paris finally checked her phone. Not the news, not the articles, just one message from her younger brother. "I heard it. I really heard him. You did good. We're okay." She smiled at the screen, closed her eyes. It had taken years, grief, hesitation, fear, but now finally she wasn't carrying it alone. Before bed, she placed the letter back in the envelope and set it on the windowsill. The moonlight caught the edge of the paper, lighting the words just faintly. She whispered to no one in particular. He wasn't wrong. And somewhere deep in the night that felt like peace. The courtroom filled quickly on that day. Reporters showed up early. Protesters lined the steps in silence. Jurors walked in with heavier expressions than before, some clutching notebooks, others just staring straight ahead. Paris Jackson wasn't present, but it didn't matter. Her words, her calm, her father's voice, they were all there, embedded in every corner of that room, like a second atmosphere no one could escape. The judge entered, everyone stood, and then it began. The prosecution spoke first. They didn't shout. They didn't even raise their voices. They simply walked the jury back through the moments that mattered: the letter, the voicemail, the pattern of control, the people who said nothing until now. And then they stopped on one name, Sean Combs. They paused. Not because of a personal vendetta, not because of rumors, but because his name kept showing up on contracts, on warnings, on whispered memories that now speak louder than any denial ever could. They turned toward the jury. Michael Jackson was not perfect, but he was aware. He saw something and he wrote it down, not for us, but for his daughter. And she didn't run from it. She stood up and spoke. Another pause. "And now it's your turn." Then came the defense. Their tone was sharper, defensive, focused on casting doubt. They said Paris was emotional, that grief changes memory, that Michael had no legal claim against Diddy, that a voicemail was not evidence of action, only fear. They called it paranoia. They called it a ghost story. And for a moment it almost worked. Until they brought up the final photo, Paris and Diddy at an award show years ago. "She's smiling," the attorney said. "Does that look like fear?" And just like that, the prosecution stood again. They didn't object, they didn't interrupt. They simply looked toward the jury and said, "Sometimes survival looks like a smile." Silence again. The final statement was short. "No one's asking you to believe in ghosts, just to believe that someone saw this long before we did and made sure someone else would remember." The jury retired to deliberate. Hours passed. Outside the crowd grew, more signs, more cameras, but no chaos, just waiting. Inside her apartment, Paris watched from a distance. She didn't pace. She didn't bite her nails. She sat still, the letter on the table, a candle lit nearby. Her hands folded, her eyes clear. When the call finally came through, it wasn't with headlines or alerts. It was a quiet buzz, a message from the court. The verdict was in. Paris didn't go. She didn't have to. The courtroom was packed again. The judge entered. The jury foreperson stood. Everyone held their breath. The verdict wasn't printed here. It didn't need to be. Because something had already happened that mattered more than guilty or not guilty. Michael Jackson had been heard. Paris had delivered his voice not as a daughter in mourning, but as a woman who refused to bury what mattered. And whether the law recognized it or not, the world already had. The defense sat still. Diddy didn't flinch, but something in his posture gave him away. The man who once walked into court with confidence now looked like someone waiting for history to decide his fate. After court adjourned, the doors opened slowly. Reporters didn't rush. They walked, quietly, thoughtfully. A woman whispered to her colleague, "It's not about just Diddy anymore. It never was." On the courthouse steps, people waited. When the judge left the bench, he passed by the jury with a nod. One juror was seen wiping their eyes. Somewhere in the crowd, a little girl held a sign with crayon letters that read, "Thank you, Paris." She wouldn't have understood the legal terms, but she understood what it means when someone speaks the truth even when it's hard. Back in her apartment, Paris stood by the window. The sun was setting. She picked up the letter one last time, read it silently, and then she said out loud, "Just once, you protected me." She placed it back into the envelope, not to hide it, but to keep it safe. She turned off the lights, opened the window, and let the cool air fill the room. She wasn't a witness anymore. She was the echo, and the echo had done its job. It had carried the truth farther than fear ever could, and it would never be silenced again.